Hi guys, it's Bryony. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to my 34/35 week bump date. I can't believe we're nearly there now. I think I've only got a chance to do one more of these videos before I go on my maternity leave. So yeah, we're very nearly at the end. It's definitely starting to feel more real now. I think a lot of my pregnancy I've kind of been in denial that anything is happening, or I've just sort of like, because I felt so ill at different points, I've just pretended it wasn't happening or just tried to ignore it. But now it's like, oh my gosh, he's coming in a few weeks' time. So on to what's been happening the last couple of weeks. It's actually been quite an eventful 2 weeks. You'll have to bear with me on this one, but before I get into the main thing that's happened, some of the other stuff that's gone on. Number one, my pelvic floor. Oh my goodness. It is already struggling. I have found that if I need to cough very badly or sneeze really badly, like I now have a little dribble and that I can't control. My pelvic floor is already weakened, and every time it happens I'm like, oh my gosh, must be doing my pelvic floor exercises. It's very common in pregnancy. He's obviously pressing down there, but yeah, that is a fun symptom that I have actually had for a little while, but only remembered this week when I had a really big sneeze and then was like, oh, right. The other thing that's been going on with my pelvic floor is his head. Sometimes he's very active. He's moving around all the time, pretty much. I can feel like various limbs poking into me at different points. Sometimes he'll be pushing up my rib. It's quite uncomfortable, but he's still very active, which is good. But sometimes he'll push his head like into my bladder, and when he does this I get this really sharp shooting pain, which I think is what is known as lightning crotch. I'm not entirely sure, but that certainly fits the description for what this feels like. But it is literally like having, there's no other way to describe this, like a knife stabbed through your clit. Like, it is agony. It is just so sharp and stingy, and it's horrible. And it can happen at like the most random moments. Sometimes you're just sitting down and like I'll feel him pressing, or I'll be standing up and you have to literally bend over and be like, oh god, like there's nothing you can do about it. It is just not pleasant. So that is not a fun symptom either. Something positive that did happen though is that last week I had my kind of fostering winter event that they do, where they kind of host a dinner party and there's usually like a little bit of a disco and all the foster carers come together and you can kind of chat with other people and have this nice dinner together, and some of the service members are there, etc. And I had really wanted to go to this. I kind of made it a mission to, if I was well enough, I was going to go to this event. Unfortunately I was, and I had a really good time, so that was super great. So that was nice to kind of have that was sort of my last big thing that I was doing before the baby came. I am still like trying to meet up with friends for coffee and stuff and have them come over and visit, etc. But that was like my last thing I was going out for before the baby came, so I was really pleased that I was able to make that. I borrowed a dress off my mum because nothing fits me anymore, but I was like, I'm gonna go. I'm not gonna spend money on a new dress for one event, but I borrowed a dress and it worked out quite well, and I had a really lovely evening, so that was super great. The other thing that I've noticed more in the last 2 weeks is my kind of bonding with babies. So as you probably are aware, I've had mental health problems in my pregnancy. I felt really ambivalent like the whole first half of my pregnancy. Hadn't really bonded with him. A lot of people describe this overwhelming feeling of love they had for their baby. I've never experienced that in pregnancy. Didn't feel particularly protective of him for a long time, etc. But much more recently, and I wonder if this is because mentally my brain is kind of like allowing me to feel more for him now that it's getting close to the due date, and it's much more likely that even if he came now, he would probably be fine. It's allowing me to kind of bond a bit more with him. So I found that I have started kind of talking to him a bit more. So if he kicks me, I'll be like, oh, honestly, little man, like really? And when I was at the fostering dinner, it happened in this building, which is kind of on a hill, and it was a freezing night. Like the cars were all iced over. When I left, I had to de-ice the car to go, and then I knew I was going to have to de-ice it when I was coming back that evening. And so I remember walking down the hill from the venue to the car and kind of talking to my bump, being like, okay, little man, we need to go really slowly. We've got to be careful here. We don't want to fall over and hurt you or me. And I realised, oh, I didn't know I was doing this now. So kind of starting to have that interaction with him that I haven't really had for a lot of my pregnancy has kind of been nice. And just something that I'd noticed I was doing more. So I think that's making me feel a bit more confident that actually I might feel a good bond when he's here, even though it's completely normal when babies are born. Like this talk of this magical rush of love that you experience, and for many women they don't have that, and it's completely normal, but it's like something you're told. The minute you see your baby, you're going to burst into tears and it's going to be amazing. If you've had like a difficult birth as well, like you're probably so exhausted you can't feel that. So it's perfectly normal not to, and to kind of feel numb, and for it to like develop later on as well, for love to kind of slowly grow. But I was a bit worried about it because I had had so little bonding in my pregnancy, that feeling like I at least had something now that I was bonding with him a bit with has been really nice. So on to the main thing that's been happening the last 2 weeks. I have been dealing with really bad episodes of palpitations. So not this weekend, but last weekend I had my second antenatal class, which is actually the last kind of it was, the antenatal class was split into 2 days, so it was one the week before and then that one. So this was a particularly long day, and initially I put this down to being quite tired, but essentially what happened was in the morning I was absolutely fine, and then in the afternoon session we were doing some first aid stuff, paediatric first aid, which I've done tons of times before because of fostering. You have to do it every 2 years, and like various nanny stuff I did prior to that. I've done quite a bit of paediatric first aid, so none of this was new. And I was literally sitting on my chair in the class, and I started to realise I'm feeling a bit funny. And I'd had lunch, I drunk plenty, and I just had like a little chocolate bar. So I thought, well, I've had some sugar, so it can't be like I'm crashing, but maybe I'm having a bit of a sugar rush, like my head feels a bit funny. And previously when I felt kind of faint, it would be when I was standing up, but I was sitting down this time. And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll just kind of lie on the floor with my pillow, and then hopefully I'll feel a bit better after a couple of minutes. Now, when I did that before with the fainting, literally within 10 seconds, I'd feel pretty much back to normal. Like the feeling of headiness would go away and I'd feel completely fine when I lay on the floor. That didn't happen this time. I laid down and I didn't feel better. And actually, in hindsight, looking back, I realised my heart was palpitating quite a lot. And so I laid down for a little bit, and then I was like, oh, I'm not feeling better. I'll lie on my left side, because that's what they tell you to do when you're pregnant. And I kind of watched the instructor walking through this, whatever it was she was explaining, kind of like distracting myself with that, but I still wasn't feeling that great. And then I decided I was going to get up and go to the toilet, mainly to kind of splash cold water on my face to see if that helped. And my another solo mum who's doing this course with me, who's become a friend of mine now, she came with me to the bathroom, and I'm really pleased she did, because I felt so ill in there. Like, I remember lying on the bench, my heart was just going so fast, and I could not work out why, and it was making me feel like I was actually going to be sick. You know, when your heart rate is so fast, it makes you feel nauseous. And I remember I lay on the floor, I put my legs up, I was breathing slowly in and out. I had no idea what had triggered it. I was just feeling, and I felt like I was kind of going to pass out, like my vision was going. And I was just lying there like, what is this? Eventually, I think after about 5 minutes, it stopped, and I started to come down. I felt a bit better, felt a bit shaky because like adrenaline rushing through me. But at least the palpitations had stopped, and once they stopped, I felt better. So that really confused me, because that was like the first time I'd had a fainting episode that bad before. And I ended up calling my mum, actually saying, I don't think I should drive after this episode because this was quite bad. Could you possibly come and bring Dad with you to pick me up? Because I was only around the corner from them, which they did, and he drove my car back home for me. I probably would have been fine, but I just wanted to play it safe because I hadn't had a fainting episode that bad before. So that was on Sunday. I presume I probably had more palpitation episodes between that Sunday and the next Saturday, but I kind of just didn't really pay attention to them, or I would feel a bit funny and I'd lie down and think it was just the fainting thing again. But on Saturday last week, I was again meeting my antenatal group. Totally different though. We were just at a pub having a drink. I had had a Coke, I'd eaten some chips. We'd been chatting for a couple of hours, and I was sitting down the whole time. And again, I was sitting at the table feeling like, oh, my heart rate feels like it's quite fast. Like I could feel it palpitating in my chest. Wasn't feeling dizzy or like I was going to faint at that point. I just felt like my heart rate was going a little bit quickly. And so at this point, it was kind of coming to the end of the evening, and I thought, you know what, I'll probably just call it a night here. Maybe I've just been up for quite a while. I don't know, but like I just thought, oh, I'll call it a night and head back home now. My car wasn't parked too far away, so I managed to leave the pub, walk to my car, and get into it without any issues. Sat down and kind of like, I'm sitting down again now. Hopefully I feel better. started the car, drove out of the car park. Within about 5 minutes though of being on the road, I felt like my chest was really tight and I could feel the palpitations were still going, and I really was not feeling that good in the head, and I was like, oh, I'm not sure, okay, hopefully I can get home, because I really wasn't far from my home. So I drove for a bit and I managed to get all the way to the end of my parents' road, and then I was like, I'm gonna have to pull the car over because I think I'm gonna lose consciousness. So I pulled it over, undid my seatbelt, turned off the engine, and kind of keeled over to the side. And again, was just there with my heart, could feel my heart was racing. And I was going, what is going on? Like, I've not had this before. Like, usually, I didn't have palpitations when I was fainting earlier on. This was something completely new. I didn't feel like panicked or anything, didn't feel anxious. Like, I was just sitting there like, what is my heart doing? It's palpitating really fast. And like the dizziness and the tight chestiness, etc. After about 2 minutes of being stopped at the side of the road, it kind of wore off, and because I was so close to home and because our road is very quiet, I very carefully drove down and pulled in and parked the car, and then went inside and sat down, and I felt almost like completely fine at this point. So I was like, that's a bit weird. And then on Monday this week, it happened again, but this time I was just sitting on the sofa on my laptop, I think watching something on Netflix or YouTube, like nothing particularly, you know, heart rate, it wasn't a scary film or anything, it was just something, I think I was watching Bridgerton, which I've seen before. And I was sitting there and I just suddenly realised I'm not feeling so good. And I was like, no, my heart's pounding. And I just so happened to have my little like pulsometer. So you know in COVID we were all told to get those like oxygen monitors in case you got COVID and you had to keep an eye on your oxygen levels because you had to go into hospital if it dropped below a certain amount. And when it also takes your heart rate, and it happened to be on the table next to where I was sitting, so I pulled it out and I put it on, and I realised that my heart rate was going around 120, 125 beats per minute, and my normal resting heart rate at the moment in pregnancy is between 80 and 90, and I had done absolutely nothing. I was sitting on the sofa, I hadn't moved, and it had just suddenly gone up. And so I thought, oh, this is a bit odd. So after like the last 2 episodes, I had kind of done a little bit of research. I'd looked online and looked at palpitations in pregnancy, and it said they were quite common. So I was like, okay, I don't need to worry. But after that episode, I was like, that is quite, it lasted again for a good like 2 or 3 minutes. And it was making me feel quite funny and like lightheaded, and my chest had gone really tight too. And I was like, okay, I just need, and I was having tight chestiness without the palpitations at other points where I would be, like I was lying on my side or lying down, I'd feel like I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was kind of wanting to pull away off my chest almost because it felt really tight. And I had my inhaler, my asthma inhaler, which I thought had been helping me, but actually I realised wasn't really doing much to open up my lungs that much either. So I thought it was helping, but it wasn't. And at that point I thought, well, I just need to call the midwives and just double check, because they always say if you're worried about anything, give them a call. And I thought, well, if they tell me, they'll probably tell me palpitations are normal in pregnancy, and then at least like I'll have calmed, you know, my mind a bit, because at this point I was a bit worried because I really was feeling quite unwell. So I called my local midwife team, and they said, I thought that she was going to either say, yeah, that's quite normal, just keep an eye on it, or B, say, book an appointment with your GP. But she actually said to me, you need to call the day assessment unit because they're going to want you to go in today and have an ECG done. And I was like, oh, okay. So I did that. I called the day assessment unit. They did ask me to come in, and I went in and had my, actually I had to wait for my mum to come back because she was out, but she took me into hospital, and I went into the day assessment unit, and they saw me quite quickly actually. Did my obs, and as it happened at that point my heart rate was still over 100, about 110, 108 I think, and again that's high for me. So she said, you know, clearly something's happened because this is still quite high for you, but my blood pressure was absolutely fine, which was good. So they did my obs, and then they sent me off to the cardiology department around the corner to go and have an ECG done, which I did. By this point I was feeling absolutely fine, so I was convinced the ECG was going to be fine too, which it was. So I had that done, had to go back to the day assessment unit and wait for the doctor to come and take a look at them and call me in. And she checked me out, and actually she was really thorough and kind of looked me over and spoke to me about my symptoms, and I explained like the Sunday incident I'd had and the Saturday incident in my car, etc. And she said to me, you know, yes, palpitations are normal in pregnancy, but the lightheadedness, the feeling like you're going to pass out, and the tight chestness, that's not usually that common. So we need to get that checked out. So she ordered a blood test for me to be done, and she also said we're going to need to do a 24-hour tape of your heart just to rule out anything else that's happening, because apparently there are some heart conditions that can pop up later in pregnancy. So they just need to be able to kind of like rule that out. So I did all that, and then I was able to go home. She kind of looked at me and said, "You don't look very well, you know, are you going to be okay at home? Do you have people there?" Because I think if I'd been on my own, she would have actually kept me in hospital, because I was kind of feeling a bit sick, and like, it was, to be fair, it was hot in that unit, and I'm always hot at the moment in pregnancy, so that didn't help. But I was like, no, I am not staying in hospital. My parents are at home. I'm gonna have someone watching me. I'll be fine. She made sure, like, really carefully about that, and then I was allowed out, thankfully. So I came home, and when I'd left, she'd said I should get a phone call the next day to book in to have my 24-hour tape fitted. And I also needed to call in the morning to get my blood test results. So in the morning I called them, and I was expecting everything to come back completely normal, because I've had several times this pregnancy where I've had like the fainting and lightheadedness. They've tested me God knows how many times for anemia, and I was like, they're just not gonna find anything on this blood test. But this time, they clearly had tested for everything, because the midwife who I spoke to, who was going through my results, went, "Oh wow, they really tested you for a lot." And she looked at my iron levels, and she said, "Okay, so the only thing that's come up is that your iron levels have dropped to 110, which is borderline." Like, they said that's when we start to think about intervening. For some women, 110, they'll have an iron level of 110 and feel absolutely fine. They won't need any treatment. But for others, it might be a problem. And she said to me, "Yours have dropped. The last time you had a blood test done a month ago, they were 130 and they had dropped to 110. She said to me, "You probably are feeling that. So we will prescribe you some iron tablets to see if that helps." And I felt so relieved, because I was like, you know, the palpitations can be caused by low iron. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that is what has caused it, so that, you know, now I've got iron tablets to take every other day, that might help and might sort out the problem. So hopefully that is what it is, but I still need to have this 24-hour tape done. As it happened, I never heard from the cardiology department the next day. And the day after that, I had to go into the hospital to pick up my iron tablets, so I just mentioned at the unit, had they heard anything? Did they know when I was going to hear from them? And she said to me, "Oh, just pop over to the cardiology department and see if they can fit it now, or like tell you when it's going to be done." And luckily I did go over there, because they'd completely lost my referral. But fair enough to the receptionist, she spent a good like 10-15 minutes calling the maternity unit, speak to the consultant, like trying to work out what had happened and make sure like that because I needed to have this tape done, they needed to find this referral. Eventually they found it, and I've been booked in to go and have the tape fitted next Wednesday. So it's just a 24-hour like monitor I have to wear, which if I have an episode, we'll hopefully pick up on it, and they'll be able to kind of rule out any underlying cause. So yeah, it's been a bit of an eventful 2 weeks actually with that. The only annoying thing is, at the moment, like, I can't drive, because I had that episode in the car where I felt like I was going to pass out, and I'm like, I can't be driving while having these problems where I feel like I'm going to lose consciousness. It's not safe, because if I was on a main road where I couldn't stop, that would be really dangerous. So I can only currently, no one's told me I can't drive, but I wouldn't feel safe driving anything more than like a really short distance along some of the quieter roads where I live. So that's kind of, when I had another episode, I was feeling really depressed about it, because I was like, I just got back from my independence. I was just feeling better. I'd stopped fainting. I was able to go and meet friends for coffee in town and stuff, and actually, you know, go to the shops, etc., without feeling like I was going to keel over all the time. And now, like, I'm having these episodes again, and I felt like yet again I was losing some of my independence. So that was a bit frustrating. I did have a little bit of a moment where I was feeling quite sad about that. But like I said, when the blood test came back and they said my iron, that might be causing it, I had a little bit of hope that maybe that could solve it. When I mentioned it on my Instagram, some people said, you know, could it be a panic attack? And I was like, well, I guess it could. But if it is, I'm completely stuffed, because I'm not anxious or panicked before they happen. There's no trigger for when they occur. They happen when I'm out and about. They happen when I'm at home doing nothing. I don't feel panicked. I don't hyperventilate. You know, I don't, like, there's no trigger for them. So there's nothing I could do to stop them if that was what they were. And obviously I hope it's not a heart thing. I'd be surprised if it was. I think this is much more likely to be pregnancy and maybe the lower iron. So I'm just hoping it's the iron, because at least then there's something I can do about it. I can take iron tablets. But other than those palpitations and getting them checked out to make sure nothing more serious is going on, pretty much all I've been doing is kind of at home, resting, getting some work done, getting the room ready for him. It's pretty much set up now. The only thing I The only thing pretty much to do is when it gets closer to time is bring in the Moses basket. It's going to go by my bed, but the rest of the room is packed. The hospital bag is pretty much packed. So we're kind of ready to go. So let me show you my 35-week belly. So this is my belly with my shirt on. And let me pull this up from the front, from the side. Yep. So that is my 34/35 week bump date. Like I said, I think the next one, my 36/37 week bump date, might be my last, although I have been able to move my maternity leave starting a week later than I originally was planning to. I decided to give myself an extra week to get some work done before baby boy kind of is due, and particularly because I'm not really doing a lot at the moment anyway, I felt like I might as well do that. So I may be able to squeeze in like one more bump date, which is just my kind of 38-week bump date, but we'll have to wait and see on that. I'm not entirely sure. So yeah, thank you so much for watching, guys. Do please subscribe, and I will see you next week. Bye everyone.